Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 8, Episode 24 of our weekly Q&A videos. And I say videos, but they're not just videos. We also release them as podcasts. If you're on YouTube right now and you want to be able to download them and listen on the go, if you want to be able to play it in the background, for example, while you're playing the game itself, or if you just want to skip ads, you can check out the links in the description to access it on all the major podcasting apps, which is, in general, my preferred way of listening to stuff.
Which is that, and the fact that we have people supporting us is the reason why we're willing to give up the 1/10 of a cent you would be giving us if you actually watch this as a video instead.
It's not even 1/10 of a cent. It's less than that, isn't it?
No. I think we get about $1 per 1,000 views.
Oh, that's true. I guess so.
Maybe even a little bit better.
Yeah, that's true. That fraction of a penny will be missed, but
we're generous. We're feeling pretty magnanimous.
Anyways, getting into the questions this week. The first one comes from Occulta, or I guess this is just more of a comment, but they have a couple of timestamps for a video, and they go, that FPS drop is so bad, you guys should probably buy a better phone, an iPhone for example. The frame rate on Android looks like it's 30, on iPhone it's 60 locked.
Yeah, I don't know that it's so much of a pissing contest between Android and iOS as it is that the device that a lot of the footage is on that I'm using, I made a decision recently. I thought I'd be improving it by increasing the resolution, and what it does is I think it causes the frame rate to drop.
Yeah, and so it's that sort of balance because you're recording at the same time, right? Yeah. So when you're playing, it's not that bad, and even when you're playing while you're recording, it probably actually looks better to play than it does come out in the video.
But it does slow down. I think some of the fights could be faster because the loading screens do take a little bit longer. So this is going to be the interactive part where I'm happy to take any kind of requests or votes for which you prefer. If you look at our videos from a year ago and you think the quality is a lot better in terms, not the quality of the creators, the quality of just what's on the screen.
What do you like better, resolution or frame rate, basically?
Yeah.
Or do you care?
And I'm happy to do it either way. I think actually by going higher resolution, even though the frame rate drops more, it still takes way more storage space for each minute of video doing it like this. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so yeah, let us know. And I guess we're not getting an iPhone, and the performance isn't actually that bad. Yeah. In general, it's just local onboard recording at the same time. Yeah. I don't know if there's like a separate hardware solution for phones the way there can be for like gaming consoles.
I think there are, except you'd have to be hooked up to the secondary device while you're playing, and that sort of defeats the purpose of just getting a few minutes here and there whenever the opportunity presents itself.
That's true, for footage, because I know that is one of the problems with a lot of stuff, like computers too, right? If you're doing sort of recording, you need more specs than whatever you're playing if you want to actually get, for example, like live commentary or even just footage to like speak over later. Right. You need a lot more juice than just whatever you would normally to run the games at the settings you're at to be able to actually record it properly too.
Right.
Yeah. So there we go.
And we're not shelling out for that.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
Our setup's fine. It's okay. Yeah. Anyways, our next question comes from R3L14N, and they say, unfortunately, been losing motivation to play recently. There's just so much I could do, and I don't know where to start and what to grind. I could either keep grinding out challenges with the reset glitch, work on completing the story mode, grind multiplayer for gears, or grind survivor. It's starting to become too much for me, so I was wondering if you guys could help me on this. I understand that each option has its values, but as a mid-tier player barely making the first gold tier, I wanted to know which modes should I be prioritizing. I would appreciate the advice greatly. And so I think this was a good question.
I think so too, because it's making us revisit the sort of big picture perspective that we don't necessarily have to do, because it's been so long since it's been a few years since we've been mid-tier.
Yeah, and there's enough information here. It's specific enough that it's not just, it depends. Because, I think normally any question for like, what should I do in this game? There's very rarely one clear option, and most of the time it depends. But you're at a very specific spot. Right? And I think there probably is sort of more of a balance shifting in one direction or the other for this. And you sort of have to make a call.
And it's funny, too, because you could take a look at it either way, that because of our experience, we sort of understand the game better, and that we have sort of that, boots on the ground kind of experience.
Yeah.
Or you could look at it as that we are too biased because we're too involved in the game and we can't maintain that. So you know what I mean? Like anytime you give an opinion, there's always going to be people who feel or can make a case that we're probably not the best people to ask because we are... we're not actually where you are. We weren't there at the same situation in the game, but I think we've got the perspective. It's actually helpful because we can play the game different ways, and because of the way we play it and how we choose to play it now, we definitely have a preference for what we like.
Yeah. And so the cop-out answer, which is what doesn't work here because you're specific enough, is that you do whatever you think will motivate you to continue playing longer, right? Because you're collecting resources and getting better stuff no matter what you do.
Yeah.
So if one mode is more fun for you or the rewards for one thing you find more meaningful, like getting new characters a lot more,
But
then you just sort of chase whatever that brings you the most sort of short-term enjoyment that means that you're more likely to stick with it. So
the way the question is formulated too, and maybe I'm reading a bit too much into this, is that I get a feeling that there's that tension that in finding that balance between the obsessiveness that the game sort of encourages, and the time sink that it becomes, where you feel like you're frustrated a little bit, right?
Yeah, or that you feel like there's one thing to do that's a good use of your time in the game, and other stuff to do that's more of a waste of your time.
Yeah, in my mind, I think the best way... This kind of question is really difficult to answer, because if you don't formulate the question right, you might get answers, but you might not get the answer that you're actually sort of aiming for. And I think one of the common problems, and I am guilty of this myself, is that if you look at just the different play options, it's a much tougher question to answer, right? You fall down that rabbit hole of comparing one thing to another. You can't really prioritize properly because nothing is ever absolutely just one thing, and nothing is ever absolutely the best thing to do. Yeah. And so if you let me reframe the question, instead of, well, which mode should I do? If we take a step back and say, okay, so let's break it down to different questions. What makes the game more fun to play, which is what you've touched on, right? Like,
yeah.
That by itself could be something completely different than what will actually get you through the game. But the other thing is, well, what helps make the time that you spend on the game the most efficient for making the kind of progress that you want?
Yeah.
And then you could also ask, what does the most to improve progress fastest for the time that you spend?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's all a matter of, it's like, I'm thinking calculus now, right? It's not just a slope. It's the derivative, which is the rate of change of the slope, that's going to make the biggest difference and have the biggest impact on how you want to play.
Yeah.
And get the most out of the game.
So I think as somebody who has not finished story mode's a great place to focus your efforts, because everything else will come with that too. There's good rewards, get to new sort of places for you to grind for credits in story mode. So I think story mode's a great place to sort of mark your progress, right, as you get better.
See, and I'm gonna try to even take a step back from that instead of talking about the specific modes. So what are the two things that make the biggest difference in how fast you'll progress in the game so that you can be successful in any of the modes that you're playing? The things that makes the biggest difference, if you could just pick one thing: gear, and critical augmentations.
See, I think even with crit augmentations, that makes more of a difference in multiplayer specifically, and the higher you get, because I think it takes so long and it's so much of an investment that per time spent.
Sure, I completely agree. But if we take a step back away from this, is you can play breakthrough, survivor, multiplayer, story mode. If we throw those all out the window, and think about what you can get, and then we think about what's the best way to get it and how hard is it. Like, absolutely, I think gear and critical augmentations both make the biggest difference. Gear is much easier to get, although you have to overlook, because we've done it for so long, there's very few gear, there's no gears actually now that we need to fuse. The resource cost to fuse them,
it's pretty high.
It slows you down a lot, and I think maybe it's hard to remember how bad it was. But I think your original idea is right, that gears are much faster. Like the crit augmentations, and we can get into that a little bit later, but this ties nicely into the question we had last week about which are the overlooked gears.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's a lot of gears that you can get that are going to make a huge difference in your game. And because gear is interchangeable,
Mm-hmm.
it gives you the best opportunity to play with a lot of different characters. It's going to make a bigger difference because when you get that gear,
Yeah.
you're going to be able to play it on whatever character you want.
Yeah, a couple good gears make almost any character playable, especially in single player. But even for, multiplayer, I think most characters are pretty playable if you've got gear better than their stats.
Yeah. One thing that, again, I wouldn't have been able to articulate it until somebody asked a question, but until you have Tantu Totem or Master's Death Card, or maybe even both, gears for specials are not going to make enough of a difference to make it worth pursuing that kind of strategy for your game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of great gears in the gear lockers. Number one, I think, is probably the only legendary gear in there, which is Razzle Scimitar, because it gives you that bar of power. It gives you basic damage boost.
Mm-hmm.
But any gear where you get basic damage boost or you get a crit chance to your basic damage,
Mm-hmm.
those are the best. You've got a ton of 3.5 star gears. So when I say 3.5 star, I'm going to remind people, I'm trying to change the way people talk about it because it's, when you talk about gear, is it 3 stars or 4 star? If it starts as 3 and it ends up as 4.
Yeah, so that 3.5 stars, 3 becoming 4.
Right, so then it offers at least a little bit less ambiguity. So there's a ton of gears that have both basic damage boost and crit chance. Like if you max them out, it's 70% basic damage boost and 45% crit chance. So that's like Blade of the War God, that's Netherrealm Kama, that's Power to Screama Sticks, that's Promethean Longsword. Those are great gears. There's 4 of them. You could gear out most of your team with it.
Mm-hmm.
And make your whole team better. But there's also other gears that give either one or the other, or give both but less. So another 3.5 star gear is the Diamond Tipped Claws, which has no basic damage boost but has a crit chance of 45%.
Mm-hmm.
Nth Metal Morningstar 3.5 star gear, which has the basic damage boost but no crit chance, as does the Knife Collection.
Mm-hmm.
But more interesting to me is there's a bunch of other gears that do both, and they're lower stars, so they're easier to get. Mark of Lady Shiva gives you 50% basic damage boost instead of 70, and 40% crit chance instead of 45. That's not a big difference, and it's 1 full star less, so it's cheaper to fuse.
Yeah.
You're more likely to get it in the packs.
Mm-hmm.
Great gear. And it makes a lot of sense, too, because when you fuse the lower gears, what you end up with is better return when you shatter them for shards.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a 2.5 star gear. There's also Energy Lance, which is 2.5 star gears, which only gives you the 50% damage boost and no crit chance, but 50% is still pretty good. And then what's really interesting, look at the 1.5 star gears. Power Gloves, 35% basic damage boost, 30% crit chance. That's pretty good for a gear that starts off as 1 star and ends up at 2 and is overall really cheap to fuse.
Mm.
And then Martial Arts is 50% basic damage boost without the crit chance, I think.
Yeah.
So those are great. And once you get those gears, I think it's going to make the biggest difference and make the rest of the play not only more enjoyable, but faster. Because that's part of what makes it frustrating, right? Is when you feel like you're aiming for something and what you're aiming for takes so long to get.
Yeah, so what that is focusing on spending money on gear lockers. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of play, what we have to look at is focusing on where to get that money from.
Right.
And so I think there's sort of 3 main places if you're grinding for credits. Which is your first time going through the story mode and getting all those rewards for first time completing ladders, right?
Yeah.
Then you have grinding the higher bonus battles, right? So bonus battle 6 especially is good for grinding credits. And then you have going through the challenge and resetting the challenge.
Yeah.
And so I think if you are at whatever point that you can be at in your story mode, your best bet is whenever there's a challenge you can beat at the stage that you're at, grind that. And do it as many times as possible. Keep resetting it. By doing that, you're getting 2 things at once, right? Which is you're getting a gold character that you can elite up a bunch. And you're getting a bunch of credits that you can funnel into gear lockers.
Right.
And so you end up with a better character for beating the challenge mode, and if you or for beating story mode, and if you do that, 3 times, just high elite level challenge characters will be enough to get you through story mode.
Right.
And then you also end up having credits to put into gear lockers, and so that's a good way of sort of working towards gear and working towards good characters both at once. Is anytime you can have a challenge, grinding that out, and then when you have time sort of in between, or if there's a challenge that you can't do, because as at your tier level, there will be some challenges that you can't actually complete properly, taking that time and using that time to focus on pushing up as far as you can in the story missions.
Because the first time through story, you get so much more credits than you do when you grind. And the biggest problem with the challenge, at least for grinding, it doesn't give you a lot of experience.
Yeah.
So you don't improve the levels of your characters very much, but it offers you so much more that I think absolutely it's worth grinding.
Yeah. So as soon as you can beat the challenge, grinding the challenge is probably the best place for a little while.
Yeah.
And then sort of marking your progress, getting characters in the challenge against story mode, and then using that as a way of getting to bonus battle 6 for that reset.
MP is an interesting proposition too, because it's always the most tempting, right?
Yeah.
Because not only can you get the sort of the promoted reward, but you can get more the higher you rank. So the threshold to me is that if it's worth playing multiplayer if you can get the top 5% relatively easily. If you can't, and you're struggling, and you're spending a lot of time playing to get there, I don't think it's worth it. If it isn't an easy fight, or if it isn't easy getting to 5%, it's not an efficient use of your time to try to rank up. And let me make the comparison. You know the game Sushi Go?
I do, but I don't know if our audience will.
Okay, so if you know the game Sushi Go, there's different things that you need to collect to get points. And some things you collect them and you just get the points, and some things you collect them, but it's a relative thing. So you have the most, say, of Maki, you get 6 points. If you're the second most, you get 3.
You're competing with other people.
Yeah, so that's the problem with multiplayer, right? Once it gets really competitive, there's diminishing returns. So you could spend a lot of time playing, and if you're struggling to even get in the top 5%, it's almost not worth it for the time that you could spend getting something else. And because multiplayer is one of the things where there's been relative stability in the cycle, that if you miss it now and you're still playing later on, you'll have another chance when the cycle comes around.
Yeah.
Although getting one piece, there are some good legendary gears in multiplayer, but it's only worth doing if you're not spending hours and hours in a week neglecting other parts of the game in order to do it.
And so, we haven't mentioned Survivor here, or Breakthrough here. And I think Breakthrough is probably better later in the game.
Forget about it. Completely forget about it.
Because you don't need it for multiplayer. You don't need it for Survivor. You never really need Breakthrough.
Correct. Yeah.
It's only more for completion. And if you are at the level that you're at, you actually don't want to over elite golds past the point of ever being able to use them with anybody else when you find new team combinations. So Breakthrough is really, really late in the game. And Survivor, it's always pretty good to do Survivor, but it's also really sort of slow, right? Because you need to spend a lot of time, and you need to spend it consistently to start getting people maxed out for crit augments and crit chance. And you need to invest a lot into even a single character getting maxed out for Survivor.
And the other thing too is when you look at how much you have to do in it to get there. So again, critical augmentations I think rank right up there with gears in terms of how useful it is, but it takes so much longer to accumulate because you don't get a lot of last laugh tickets, and out of those last laugh tickets, only a fraction of those are augmentations, and only a fraction of those augmentations are the really desirable critical ones.
So if you're doing Survivor, definitely don't grind it out with the resets. Maybe once you've completed a challenge or two.
You want to at least complete the challenge once, because not only for the credits, but you unlock the character so that you never know when the challenge character is coming back, if it ever does. And you want to unlock it so that you have the option of buying a promotion for it later. Yeah.
So I think that if you're doing Survivor, you do it in a week where maybe you don't feel like grinding the challenge anymore. You are sort of where you're at with your progress for single player in the story mode, and you either have your 5% in multiplayer or you're not prioritizing multiplayer. You can, sort of spend that extra time or for a little variety. Because it is also a variety of gameplay, so it might be not bad to mix it up. But if you're earlier on, grinding it doesn't make as much sense. Another thing that you could do is not do resets with it and just do the actual amount that they want you to play.
Yeah. But absolutely, so I guess because we've clarified sort of what our goals are, I think it makes the most sense to do the challenge at least once.
Yeah.
If you're going to be spending a lot of time grinding, do some multiplayer only if you're at a level where you can get to the top 5% relatively comfortably easily.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to do that, prioritize the gear seasons and not the multiplayer character seasons, because you're going to drive yourself nuts trying to do that.
Because no matter what it is, it's going to be months and months until you get them eluded up as easy as you can get like characters from the packs or from the store.
You know what else?
Challenges.
Part of me thinks that if anything, one of the lower priorities should also be right down there is Phantom Zone. Did we mention that?
No, we didn't.
All right, so Phantom Zone. So the problem with Phantom Zone is that... All right, so maybe instead of talking about the problem with Phantom Zone, the problem with not playing Phantom Zone, what are the cons of not playing Phantom Zone? You're going to be short of Valorium Alloy when you want it to improve your metal characters, and it's going to cost you getting Nth metal.
Yeah.
By the time that you want it, it's going to take you a long time to get more, and that's really like a bottleneck for promoting the specials and the passives of metal characters. But you'll never get to that point if you burn out. Like, you'll never have anything good enough that's worth doing.
And it's such a long-term investment that the problem is that even if you're putting time in now, honestly, it's another one of those things where the longer you wait before you start doing it, the faster it's going to go because you'll have better stuff when you actually end up start doing it.
Yeah.
So it is really mostly a waste of time. And even if you already had a bunch of other good stuff and you were sort of maxing out and you were focusing most of your effort on Phantom Zone, like people who more like in positions where we were when it came out, you're still like months, maybe even years from having characters in a position where you can have like a metal team. And so you're far off them actually being like useful and online.
Even though our demonstration videos in Phantom Zone typically run less than 20 minutes per crystal, that's not typical, I think.
Yeah. And that's like really sort of refining it down to as close to a science as we can.
So here's the thing too. I mean, what's tempting about metals is even if you can't promote them, they have really high stats, right? And so even at like Elite 0, you get them to level 50, they're going to be fun to play with. But because of the high cost to get them, the big jumps that you get from promotion, not just from leveling up, but from promotion, you lose out on that. So it's almost a bit of a mirage to see our Batman, Ninja, Catwoman at Elite 3 really kicking everybody's butt.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of Nth metal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when you look at also upgrading their passives and specials and everything, there ends up being a lot of cost where if you have the stats but you haven't upgraded them as characters, then they're actually worse for having those stats because their passives are worse than other people with the same stats.
So there, I think we did a calculation, somewhere north of 30,000 Valorium Alloy.
Yeah.
To get all the specials up and the passes up when you get them up to Elite 3.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a much later game proposition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there we go. That's our best swing at a guide for where you're at.
Yeah.
And what we would prioritize.
I think it does take into account a lot of the variables, actually, that and they're easy to assess. It's not like you have to pick a number. It really is when it's feels relative, like those are, I think, pretty reasonable guideposts.
Yeah, and the caveat to that is that if following that sounds not fun, don't do it. Right?
Yeah.
The caveat is always listen to us as much as optimizing how you're spending your time is fun, and like figure out what is fun to you about this game if there's something specific, and chase that first and foremost always. Because this is the thing you do in your free time. It doesn't need to be, we don't need to find the equation for how to have the most fun in the game. Only you know what's going to be most fun for you.
So if you're watching this on YouTube, that was surprisingly quick considering it's a Red Sun team, and Red Sun teams, because or Red Sun Green Lantern team, considering that you don't do any crit damage, that was pretty wickedly fast.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I wanted to point that out.
So there we go. Our next comment comes from the Nefarious Magic Man, and they say, "What nationality are you guys?"
We are Canadian.
Yeah.
But that's not what people usually mean when they say nationality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think my gut reaction is I don't want to answer this. The reason that, so there's a joke, and like it was a comedian you introduced me to.
Yeah, who we absolutely love, and we're gonna frame this right because it reminds us of this joke, but we're not coming at the questioner, the question asker, with this energy.
No,
because
yeah.
It's a fair question, and I think also, when people make content where they talk about politics, when people make content where they share their opinions like we do, it's fair to want to understand what informs those opinions.
Sure. And I consider answering that formulation of the question if there is some sort of explanation or just more detail about why they wanted to know.
Why it matters.
Right, because otherwise it's kind of fishing for personal details that makes it easier to breach our privacy.
And that's what ties into this joke. So James A. Caster, wonderful comedian. I can't recommend him enough. This joke that we're going to talk about is from his special on Netflix, but if you want to see his stuff, you can watch him for free in Taskmaster on YouTube.
Oh, he's hilarious.
He's super
Taskmaster's a great
funny.
show.
Taskmaster is a great show.
Yeah.
But James A. Caster is a great comedian, and so he's got a bunch of stuff, and his comedy specials have stuff that sticks with you in a way that other comedy doesn't always, and it doesn't. Sometimes it feels like he's trying to make things big or dramatic or meant to stick with you. Right. But a lot of times it just feels like he's doing his weird framework for really good comedy, and it just happens to stick with you, which is what I like. I like that a lot too. Like the bits that he does are really sort of memorable. And so one of his jokes, and we actually wrote down...
We had to look it up because I want to get it right.
We looked it up, We don't want to steal it from him on Netflix, so we get like copyright struck for this video. But so the joke is he is talking about somebody at work who would tell him stories. And he says, and as soon as he says Chinese guys, I was thinking, I hope that's relevant. Please let it be relevant that they're Chinese. Never is. Never get halfway through the story and goes, and then they taught me Mandarin and it was nice. It's always that they did something wrong. But he just put that little detail in there. Doesn't link them together himself. But he just leaves that for you. And goes, well, you join the dots. I will. You're a racist man. Found some different dots and I joined them. Surprise!
Yeah.
And I butchered the delivery of that just a little bit. But the point of it, which I thought was really funny, was the idea of like when somebody shares that I hope that's relevant really stuck with me as an idea.
Yeah.
And so when we read this, it sort of brought up the same thing, and he continues a bit and he talks about how he likes to tell people's nationality at the end of the story, leaves it like a surprise, right? Leaves you on the edge of your seat, suspenseful. And then he brings that back in the show where he's telling an unrelated story later, and I think he literally maybe ends the entire show by just saying what the race of the person he was talking about was, where he was like, she was Puerto Rican the whole time. So it's a good special, funny guy, and relevant comment where it is interesting because I think if you have that sort of context, right, like he's talking about, if it's relevant to the story, right? If the person goes, oh, they were, speaking in some other language, right? And that matters. You go, okay, well, it was probably Chinese, right? If they're Chinese.
Well, that's if you can identify them properly. Maybe they're not Chinese. Maybe they're Vietnamese and or they're Filipino, or they're Japanese, or they're Korean.
Yeah, but so there's a big sort of difference to acknowledging nationality and race when it matters, and acknowledging it when it doesn't.
Right. So it's not that the question necessarily is racist, but there's such a potential there, and there's such a history of the way that kind of question is being asked, that it's not the questioner's fault. It's that it gets my hackles up a little bit.
There's an interesting consideration, and it's like a lot of stuff with race where it can be really complicated really quickly because there's a lot of levels for stuff. That's one of the interesting conversations when you have for like race, invisible minorities and stuff like that, right? Where you sort of have to handle it as two things at once, where the one way that you're handling it is it's this really important thing that matters a lot and affects a lot about how different people move through the world, right? Yeah. And everybody's experience is touched by and affected by race, right? I don't know if there's a single person alive who hasn't had a life that would have been exactly the same if they were a different race.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Even if you're ignoring like culture and everything else, right? Because culture culture and race are sort of correlated, but they're not inherently tied together too.
Right.
You can be your skin color can be any color, and you can be raised in any culture, right?
Right.
And then the second way you have to come at it is that race isn't even really like a real thing, right? There's some sort of general broad categorization, but you look at like DNA tests, right? And how they're not actually that good at determining what skin color you are, right? There's no genetic basis for what your skin tone is.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily the best argument though, because it's like a lot of other things. Just because we can't recognize or decode the information on it doesn't mean the information isn't there. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's an interesting thought, but I'm not sure that's the best way to go about it, because I'm sure that there's some, like the melanin content in your skin is going to be determined by your genetics, right?
Yeah, but then you have to look at the sort of more fundamental question of what even is race. Right?
Oh, for sure.
And so,
yeah.
Like there was, like country borders, right? And what that means. And talking about, like, we have this really sort of strong association of this hard line between, for example, Texas and Mexico.
Yes.
Right? That doesn't mean anything.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
You talk about people who live, like, a few miles apart from each other, and there's absolutely nothing. And, you look at people from different countries who have different skin tones and who are treated in totally different ways, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of race as a construct based off of primarily skin color and privilege, as opposed to like an actual sort of thing that's written into who you are, right? Yeah. Where you can be from a place, you can be one race, and a condition that changes your skin pigment or random luck can mean that you move through life treated in a way that's totally different from your ethnic heritage.
100%. I think, though, that if the argument is that the difference is so subtle and has so little bearing on what we fundamentally consider what makes us human.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a better and more nuanced argument, because a lot of it is genetic. Mm-hmm. But the kind of genetics that matter, it's not like missing a chromosome or having an extra chromosome, right?
Yeah.
It's something very, very subtle. And it's subtle enough that we can't determine that with the tools that we've got. And we've been trying to do it for a long time. And when I say we, I mean society, not me as as a racist scientist.
Yeah, because what race is really just a set of average characteristics that every individual constructs in their own head based off of their lived experiences. Yeah. And it doesn't really exist outside of that capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was not what the question was.
No, it wasn't. So we're Canadian is the...
Yeah, that's the actual literal answer to that question. And I want to make sure that if we do another question, we're going to end it quick enough, because I want to do a play-by-play on the last little bit that's going to come up, not in this screen, but the next slide.
So we'll go quick. This question is from Care, and they say, is Godfall Superman any good with Nekron Scythe? The second last part of his special 2 is an unblockable freeze, and then the hot object from the ground. I'm not sure how much damage it'll actually end up doing, but maybe it'd be high enough that you could use a Fourth World Mace, Tantu Totem, and Nekron Scythe, and use him in basically the same way you'd use Batman Ninja Batman. The one valid benefit would be that it's an unblockable effect, so even if you can't do the crazy splash damage Batman can, you can more easily guarantee KOs. I tested on my own, but I'm missing the mace for now, and I can't augment his crit chance, make it inconsistent.
Yeah. The biggest problem with the freeze specials, the characters that have them, is that they aren't back end loaded for damage after the freeze. Not nearly as much as the stun specials of, say, Batgirl and Batman Ninja Batman Special 2. Batgirl Special 1 and Batman Ninja Batman Special 2. Stun is easier to do because there's not only lots of characters that do it, whether it's as part of the special or part of tag-ins. It's easier to transfer because you can tag out after stunning, and you can also have gears that will stun.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's controversial to say that the best part of Nekron's Scythe offensive power is the boosted stun damage. I mean, it's great that it does freeze too, but it's the stun that's the most important.
Mm-hmm. So to answer the question, you technically can, but it won't be nearly as good. It's similar, but it's a weaker version of the same thing.
Yeah. And I guess if there was more characters that could do it, like if there were characters that froze at the beginning, like look at Batgirl, right? Her special one, it does a smidgen of damage, a smidgen of the total damage, and then it does a huge amount after she stunned them.
Mm-hmm.
And because the splash damage with the knives is 50% as opposed to the mace is 15% on a special 2, that's what makes the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the fight. So that's the question for this week. This is the fight I wanted everybody to see. This is sort of the neat thing. And you don't see this often. This is the third time that I've seen this kind of thing happen. Or that we've got it on record. And if somebody wants to guess, this is the time to write down your guesses and see if you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I have the chance to try to get this in a fight, I will misplay the game intentionally just to try to do it. So, all right, so this is not anything special. You get Killing Joke Joker. He's going to give everybody 3 bars, but it's not worth waiting. We took some away because of Raven's passive, and now we've got Superman, but we need to take off his shell of protection before we can do it. The good thing is we've got 10 to tone. We've got 3 bars now. Simultaneous supers.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, which is really cool, the problem is the tail end of the super is not on the same plane. So the crossover was not nearly as, there wasn't as much overlapping at the end where Raven was in the air, right?
Yeah.
But look, this happens every single time with simultaneous supers, where you lose
cinematic.
Yeah, it's cinematic, but you lose all your ability to do any of the buttons. Like, you can't do specials, you can't keep track of your health, and it makes it almost impossible to fight with your regular strategy because we got no specials. She's our special specialist. She's got no specials. She's sort of our special specialist. She got no specials either.
It's like playing Calavera's Gunslinger on the highest difficulty, where they take away all your HUD elements.
Yeah, the good thing is, though, that what he's doing is getting rid of our not so great basic damage characters, and we've got Batman, Ninja, Catwoman come in, but we have no idea how we're doing.
It's hard to figure out which direction to swipe in for the tab combo.
We can't, because it doesn't. Even if we knew, that it wouldn't work. And there we go. That was cool. Third time. The best one was Nightwing and Bane, because they were working on the same level when they did the simultaneous supers. And so you could see a bunch of stuff overlapping at the same time and happening simultaneously.
So there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's it for the content for this video. Sorry for the last minute for anybody who was on a podcast. But I'd like to give a shout out to Eliza Velna Caton. She found a whole host of spelling errors on the Scooby Eats website, which is the new project from the man who brought us Garfield Eats.
Right.
So this shout out was brought to you by the CEO of Enter Gauge, Nathan Masry.
All right. That's cool.
And I'd love to talk about Scooby Eats if we get a chance in a future episode. Yeah. We'd like to give a huge thank you also to everybody who supports us on Patreon.
And that would be Console Peasant and Edwoon at the highest tier, Last Word. Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo, who support us on the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 2for1, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E. at the gratitude level.
There you go. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Komoda.